fresh new Chinese economic data out, and it does show resilience in the face of U.S. tariffs. Around 10 a.m. local time, that's when we heard the new number out, second quarter GDP growth at 5.2% year on year. That is lower than the previous quarter growth of 5.4%, but it's still above the 5% annual growth target for GDP for the year for China. And analysts say this, they say, look, the U.S. trade war, the tariffs from Donald Trump, they have been a dampener on sentiment in China, but not the massive shock that many people had feared. Still, China is facing quite a number of systemic economic challenges. I want to share with you some really strong insight from Nick Morrow of the Economist Intelligence Unit. And he says this to CNN. He says, quote, "We'll need to untangle the difference between what the headline figure says and what companies and households are seeing on the ground. For many, this doesn't feel like an economy growing at around 5%. That's a really important point that he's making here, that there's a concern of a mismatch between the official number that's being reported and the actual sentiment on the ground among consumers and corporates across China, because the reality is China is facing a number of persistent economic headwinds. Let's bring up the list for you. They include low consumer confidence, low consumer spending. They also include high youth unemployment, as well as the ongoing property slump. Now, we also reached out to Larry Hu, an economist of the Macquarie Group, and he draws a direct line between low consumer spending and this ongoing property slump that's been happening in China. And he tells CNN this, quote, let's bring it up for you. Falling home prices have led to a negative wealth effect on consumption, as housing accounts for 70% of household wealth. He goes on to say, consumption will not recover until housing recovers. Now, in contrast, China's export machine, that is still humming along really nicely and powering forward. In fact, on Monday afternoon, that's when we got the latest trade data, export data from China. China posting 5.8% export growth in June. That's year on year. And a factor behind that is because of the export rush. A number of companies and businesses working really hard to be able to get their goods out of China as fast as possible as this fragile trade truce holds between China and the United States. But Linda, we know that the clock is ticking because the current pause on higher U.S. tariffs on China is going to run out soon. In fact, that deadline is going to be August the 12th, and that is less than 1 month away. Back to you, Linda.
August the 12th. We will see if they negotiate a deal before that deadline. Kristie Lu Stout in Hong Kong, thanks so much.